Thanks. You can have a seat. We are continuing our series called Never Alone. It's based on Max Lucado's book, which is basically a look at the miracles in the Gospel of John. And actually, John only talks about 8 miracles in his book. 6 of them are unique to the Gospel of John. We don't find them in Matthew, Mark, or Luke. And so we're kind of focusing in on some of those miracles. Last week, we talked about the idea that God is the God of the ordinary. And we looked at the marriage feast at Cana of Galilee. We talked about the idea that God works on his schedule, not ours. We looked at the idea that God often saves the best for last. And the other principle that the power of Jesus Christ can take something that is ordinary and change it into something extraordinary. And he'll do that in our lives as well if we will let him. This morning we're going to look at the second principle, but before we do, I want to tell you a story. About 3-4 weeks ago, when we had all that ice stuff going on here? Josh and I had a project that we had to get done, and we were trying to coordinate vehicles. And we were trying to go, okay, Josh, if you put this in your vehicle, I'll put this in my vehicle, and then we'll get there and we'll do this project. And I said, Josh, why are we messing around with all this? I said, let's just use your truck and let's hook up our trailer. I said, we'll put everything in the back of the trailer. And I said, after we do that, I said, what we'll do is, I said, then we'll do the project. We'll work out of the back of the trailer if the weather's bad. And I said, and then when we're all done, I said, I can just take it back to my shop and unload all the stuff and we're good to go. And so we figured out that'd be a good plan. So we did that. We got the project done, slick, everything went smooth, got home. I pulled into my driveway to go back to my shed, and I realized that it would be easier if I backed the shed up to backed the truck and trailer up to the shed and unloaded it that way. So instead of pulling in, I decided to just back it up. Well, here was the problem. I had forgotten that I had parked one of my other vehicles in front of the shed, so I didn't have enough room to turn the truck and the trailer around. So I thought, you know what? I got an idea. I will go around the back of the shed and drive around the back, and then I'm facing the right way. Now, at this point, I left the hard surface part of my driveway. Now, when the truck slid beside my shed, I should have stopped at that point, but no, I'm not going to do that. So what I decided to do was I backed it up a little bit after I started to slide, and I drove back, and then as I turned around in the back, I had plenty of room to turn around the back, I could not get up the hill. And if you know this, when it comes to four-wheel drive, even on ice, it don't make a difference. And I could not get up the hill. So now at this point, I should have stopped. But I didn't do that. I decided, well, since I can't get up the hill, let me go to the south side of my property and drive all the way around my property and get up. I can get a run at it that way. So I started to get the run at it. At which point, this happened. Now, this is like 2-3 days after this. At this point, when this happened, this is all solid ice and snow and everything else. Now I have the trailer jackknife. I cannot go forward, and I cannot go backwards. I'm stuck. So rather than keep making it worse and worse and worse and worse and worse, I decided to walk away. So I walked away, and I thought, I will get it the next day. That was the day that it rained all day long. So now I have water, ice, and mud. So I decided that was not a good day. I actually got out there and tried it, and all I did was realize it was going to get worse, so I stopped completely. Now I'll tell you the end of the story in a minute, but at the end of this message. But this was my dilemma. I couldn't go forward, and I couldn't go backwards. I was stuck. And this morning, we're going to talk about this principle that God, you are never alone, even when you're stuck. We're going to look this morning at the second miracle in the Gospel of John, and it's actually also the second miracle of Christ. It takes place in Cana of Galilee as well. But we're introduced to another place called Capernaum. And if you'll look, you will see the red dot is where Cana is. And if you look in the northwest corner of the Sea of Galilee, you'll see a little place called Capernaum. That's where this story takes place, because a man from Capernaum is going to go meet Jesus at Cana of Galilee. Now here's what you need to know. This is what's important to our story. It's about 18 to 20 miles uphill from here to Cana of Galilee. So let's pick up the story, John chapter 4. Here's what it says. And Jesus came again unto Cana of Galilee, where he had made the water wine. And there was a certain nobleman whose son was sick at Capernaum. Now when he heard that Jesus had come out of Judea into Galilee, he went unto him and besought him that he would come down and heal his son, for he was at the point of death. Now this is a nobleman. This is a guy who probably worked for the Roman Empire. He may have been under the employment of Herod or one of the Herods and one of the rulers. And so there he is, and he's got a sick kid. And his kid is so sick that his kid is probably going to die, and he hears that Jesus is in Cana of Galilee. So he decides to leave his sick child and go find Jesus. Because you see, at this point in life, this guy's stuck. He has tried everything that he could try. Nothing has worked. He now hears that Jesus is there, and maybe if he can get Jesus to leave Cana, come all the way back to Capernaum, because he is, after all, a Roman soldier. And so maybe Jesus can then come all the way back there and then heal his son. That was the plan. So notice what happens. So Jesus said unto him, except you see signs and wonders, you won't believe. And the nobleman said unto him, Sir, come down ere my child die. In other words, look, you have got to help my kid. And we don't know why Jesus made this statement, except you see signs and wonders, unless he was making it also to the crowd. And basically he looks at him and says, look, this is what needs to happen. And Jesus, look, I'm not asking for something, you need to come and help my kid. Because nothing else is helping him. Those of you parents that have had a sick kid, you know how helpless you feel. And this is a man, and this is what I want you to understand. This is a man who traveled 18 to 20 miles and left his kid, who's at the point of death. He leaves his kid to go find Jesus. That's how desperate this guy is. Now notice what happened. And Jesus said to him, go your way, your son lives. And the man believed the word that Jesus had spoken unto him, and he went his way. And as he was now going down, his servants met him and told him, saying, your son lived. And inquired of them the hour that he began to amend, and they said unto him, yesterday at the 7th hour the fever left him. So the father knew that it was the same hour in which Jesus had said to him, thy son lives, and he himself believed, and his whole house. This is, again, the second miracle that Jesus did when he was come out of Judea into Galilee. What you have here is a story that often we blow through without thinking about the implications of it. Here was a guy who was an important person in the Roman world. And he humbled himself enough to travel 20 miles to meet up with Jesus and try to convince Jesus, you need to come back and heal my kid. I want you to think about this for a second. You've got 20 miles. It's about a day and a half, 2-day journey. You're walking there, and the whole time you're going in your mind, okay, how am I going to approach him? And I'm going to tell him this, and I'm going to, hi, I'm so-and-so, or what am I going to say to him? So he's played this out in his head the whole time. And he finally gets there, and he says, okay, he gets the opportunity. He says, Jesus, please, will you come down with me and help my kid? And Jesus looks at him and says, go on home, he'll be okay. Now, what do you do? What do you do? I mean, there's no balloons and sparkles and hoopla or anything else. Jesus looks at him and says, go home, your kid's going to be okay. And it says he turns around and goes home. Now he's got an 18 to 20 mile walk, thinking the whole time, did I just waste what little time I had with my kid? But I think in his heart he believed the second Jesus said he was done that, okay, you don't need to show up. You can do this from a distance. And so he turns around and he heads back. And on his way back, his servants come running out and meet him part way outside of the city and go, hey, you got to get back there. You're not going to believe this. Oh, tell me what happened. He's okay. Well, when did that happen? And he put the time frame together and he said, okay, let me tell you the story now. And it says not only did the man believe, but also his family believed. So we have this principle here in this story of the idea of this guy is stuck and he comes to Jesus with his plan, his idea. You come home with me and we'll get it all figured out. And Jesus turns it upside down on him and he goes, look, I don't need to be there. You just need to trust me and go home. It's going to be all right. And you see, that's what this guy does. There's a second story we're going to look at this morning too. This story is much different. It happens about halfway in the ministry of Jesus Christ. In fact, it is actually a turning point in the life of Christ. After this miracle, what happens is the Jewish leaders aggressively seek to kill Jesus because they come to the conclusion that the only way they can continue to deal with Jesus is if they get rid of him. The story happens in Jerusalem. It's at a pool called Bethesda. Here's what it says. It says sometime later, again, this is the middle of the life of Jesus. He comes to Jerusalem for one of the Jewish feasts. Now there is in Jerusalem near the sheep gate a pool, which in Aramaic is called Bethesda, which is surrounded by 5 covered colonnades. Here a great number of disabled people used to lie, the blind, the lame, the paralyzed. One who had been an invalid for 38 years. Now you want to talk about stuck? This guy's stuck. When Jesus saw him lying there and learned that he had been in this condition for a long time, he asked him, do you want to get well? Now, does that not seem like the dumbest question in all the world? I mean, there's all these, and by the way, there's all of these invalid people, there's all these sick people, there's all these paralyzed people, there's all these people, and what they believed was that the pool, they believed that God would come down at certain times and stir up the water, and whoever got in first got healed. So a lot of times they would sit around this thing waiting for this to happen. And so there's this guy, he has been an invalid for 38 years. He's as stuck can get. And Jesus walks up to him and says, do you want to get well? Now listen, that seems like a really dumb question, but when you look at the life of Jesus and the people that he heals, it's a question he often asks. What do you want from me? Because here's something you'll learn about Jesus. Jesus is never going to force himself on you. You're going to have to make a choice. Jesus is not going to automatically say, you're going to have to make a decision to put your faith and trust in Jesus Christ. You're going to have to want it. He's not going to do for you without you making the decision. And in this case, he looks at the man and he says, do you want to get well? He wants to know. Do you? And notice his response. Sir, the invalid replied, I have no one to help me in the pool and the water is stirred. While I'm trying to get in, someone goes in down ahead of me. In other words, Jesus, look, if you really want to help me, I want to get well. Why don't you wait? And the second that pool starts, you get me down there faster, we'll be okay. That's the solution here. I need you to help me get in the water. And Jesus looks at him and says, get up, pick up your mat and walk. At once, the man was cured. He picked up his mat and walked. Now, 38 years. This guy had been in this condition, and now all of a sudden, does Jesus say, okay, let's hocus pocus, magic thing, big show? No, he doesn't do any of that. Jesus simply looks at him and says, get up, take your mat with you, and walk. Again, the man does what? Does he sit there and argue? And by the way, again, we blow through these stories without thinking about them. You need to understand how hard this would have been for this guy. Why should I even try? My feet don't work. My legs don't work. Here's a question for you. Do I really want to change? Because see, for 38 years, I've been able to beg. That's how I've provided a living for myself. If I get up and walk, I got to go get a job. If I get a walk, are they still going to accept me? Where am I going to live? What am I going to do? Everything in my life is going to change. That's why Jesus looks at him and says, do you want to get well? Do you? How serious are you about this? And it says the man gets up and walks. Now, there's a next section in this story, and I'm not going to have time to go to it today, so I'm going to skip over it. But it's a whole thing about the Sabbath thing, because when Jesus does this, he does it on the Sabbath. And that causes a problem. That causes a big problem. But ultimately, this guy goes to the synagogue, and it picks up here at the end in verse 14. It says, Jesus found him at the temple and said to him, see, you are well again. Stop sinning or something worse may happen to you. The man went away and told the Jewish leaders that it was Jesus who made him well. When they first confronted the guy, they're like, what are you doing? What are you doing walking today? How in the world did all this happen? And he goes, I don't know. This guy told me to get up and walk. I got up and walked. And he finds himself at the temple. So we don't know if his illness was associated with something he had done. Or if Jesus is saying to him, look, because again, that was in that culture, it was a prevalent idea. It's not an idea Jesus reinforces. But in this story, he does connect somehow his sin and his sickness. And he says, you need to change. What I find significant is this. Jesus never told him where to go. But he heads immediately to the temple. So he had to have some kind of religious background, because that was the idea, was to certify that you'd done. And Jesus finds him at the temple. And then Jesus basically says, now go and basically go and live your life for God and not for yourself. And then he goes then back to the Jewish leader and oh, by the way, the guy you're looking for, it's Jesus. He's the one that did this. And then it goes on to say, from that point on, the religious leaders went, we got to get rid of this guy. Not only is he healing people, but he's healing people on the Sabbath. And so at that point then, they aggressively start pursuing how they're going to end up getting rid of Jesus. But in this story, in these stories, there's a couple of principles that I think work well for us as far as how we work in our lives when we're stuck. So here we go. Because both of these guys were stuck, okay? The one guy, he wanted his kid well and couldn't do anything about it. This guy, the other guy, not able to walk. In both stories, the focus has to be Jesus. Now that seems kind of obvious. I mean, the centurion, he travels all that way to go see Jesus. The invalid man who's sitting there, Jesus is the solution to his problem. But here's my question for us when we get stuck. Why is Jesus the last person we go to? I mean, we'll talk to a spouse. We'll talk to friends. We'll talk to counselors. We'll go read books. We'll talk to everybody. But Jesus is like okay, let's go pray about it now. I've done everything else. Why do we go there last? You see, one of the things that you're going to learn is if you're going to get unstuck, and wherever you are stuck in life right now, the first place you have to go is Jesus. That's where you have to go first. Not last. Not in the middle. Not if you've tried all of these. No. The first place we go is to Jesus. Second thing you notice in this story is this idea. Your plan may not be his plan. In both situations, they had a plan in their mind. For the centurion, his plan was, Jesus, you come back to Capernaum with me and fix my kid. And the guy at the pool of Bethesda, what was his solution? You help me down into the water when the waters stir. And in both situations, what does Jesus do? He simply speaks. He looks at the centurion and says, he's healed. Go home. He looks at the invalid guy and says, stand up. Oh, grab your mat. We don't want to leave trash laying around. Go home. Go on. I mean, in both situations, it was a simple thing. It was the words of Jesus. Here's a second principle. If you're going to get unstuck, you go to Jesus and you focus on his word. Now here's what you need to understand. You may not like what he says. You want to fix your marriage? You may not like what Jesus says about what you need to do to fix your marriage. You want to know how to have a great marriage? You go to the Bible and basically you look at biblical principles. And you start basing your marriage off of what God says. Here's what you're going to find. God says, put your spouse first. Not about you. Put your spouse first. So, for me, I try to do it simply. Again, I'm not perfect at this. I'm a work in progress too. But you know what I try to do? I try to end every day with the idea, what did I do for my wife today? How did I serve my wife? How did I put her first today? Now, I'm not saying I do it every day, but that's my goal. Why? Because that's what God says as far as a husband taking care of his wife. That's what God says to do. If you think I get up every morning and go, ooh, boy, I got to do something for Jean today. No, I want to serve my God. And my God says, if you're a husband, this is what you do for your wife. As a parent, how do I parent? I parent according to how God tells me to parent. As a grandparent, oh no, you're just supposed to spoil them and wind them up and send them home. No, that's not what the Bible says. The Bible, by the way, addresses the issue of grandparents. You know that, right? You have roles and responsibilities. As an employer, as an employee, you have, God lays it out for how you function as an employee or an employer. God lays out, you're struggling with finances, you're stuck with your finances right now, God lays out how you handle your finances. He lays out some really clear biblical principles on finances. So what do? I go to Jesus and I go to the Word of God and I say, okay, God, what do I need to do? And then whatever God says, and this is the third part, you got to do something about it. This is where most of us get stuck. Oh, Jesus, help me. Oh, God, thank you for making this clear on what I should do, but you don't understand my situation, God. I can't do that. And you see, ultimately, you have to do something to get unstuck. Ultimately, these guys had to act in obedience. So what happened? The nobleman's, what does he got to do? He's got to turn around and head back, trusting that God's going to do what God said he did. The guy who's been the invalid, what does he got to do? He's got to stand up. And, what if he would have sat there and go, oh no, my legs won't work. I've tried. It's just too hard. I would rather stay here. No, he just, okay, let's give this thing a shot. And I think it would have been incredible. I mean, I don't know if you've ever had a foot or a leg or whatever else in a cast for a long period of time where it's been unmovable. And you have to start, I mean, we go to therapy for weeks to get stuff to move again that's been immobilized for a length of time. And Jesus looks at him and says, up, go. And I'm sure this guy's like, wow. I've never seen life from this perspective. Because for all of that time, he's been crippled. He's basically seen life at this level. Now all of a sudden he's standing and walking. But he does something. This is what you have to do. You have to obey and you have to do something about it. Go back to my truck. You want to know how I got it unstuck? I waited until the ground froze solid. Because at that point, I could take my tractor, which is a Massey Super 90, with a 6-foot bucket and a 6-foot blade on the back, and I came up with a plan. So here was my plan. It was almost foolproof. My plan was I was going to unhook the trailer, which I did. Now, the problem is I don't have a jack on the front of the trailer that had a tire on it. What I had one that had the plate on the bottom of it. So I came up with a plan, and I went to my shed where I have my snow things for my grandkids. You know those things that they slide down hills on, those big round things? So I put one of those underneath the jack on the trailer and brought it down. And I thought, I'll hook up the chains to the back of the trailer. I will then pull the trailer back to where, and it was a perfect plan, and it worked very well for 25 feet. So I got it unhooked, the tractor, and again, the ground was solid. There's enough weight on the tractor. I'm not spinning. I got chains on the tractor. I'm doing good. I'm feeling pretty good. And then I hit a rut that had frozen solid, and it took that jack stand and just bent that baby down to nothing. And I figured at that point, what else, how much more damage can I do? So I just drug it to the back of the property and left it there. Later, I went home and ordered a new jack stand, a new jack, for trailer jack deal. So I got the trailer up there. Well, the truck was a little bit easier. I was able to drive it out. I did get it stuck once. I hooked it up to the tractor, pulled it out. It's now sitting at Josh's house. The trailer now is in the back of my property. The new jack stand is sitting in my shed. I'm all ready to just unbolt it and bolt it on. I have a plan on how to do that. And it'll all be fixed and everything will be back to normal. But here's what you need to understand. Because I tried to save myself 5 minutes, instead of just pulling my the truck and the trailer in and staying on the blacktop and walking from my shed to the back of the trailer, I tried to save myself some time by trying to back it up on ice, and I got off of the hard surface, and it just made a mess. So instead of saving myself 5 minutes, I cost myself, when it's all said and done, between the trailer jack, $100 trailer jack that I had to buy, and the time it's going to take me to do this, I've got probably now about 4 or 5 hours into this project when it's all said and done to save myself 5 minutes. Because here's why. And you're laughing. You're laughing because you've all done stuff like this. Don't you piously look at me like, oh, I'd never do that. No, the difference between you and me is I got to be up here and I got pictures. That's the only difference. Everybody in here has got one of those stories where you've done something like this. But here's the thing. I got stuck. And I could do one of two things. I could just sit there and look at and talk about how stuck I am, or I can do something about it. Look, wherever you are stuck this morning, whether it be your marriage, whether it be with your kids, whether it be with your money, whether it be with your career, whether it be with your retirement, whether it be with your job, whether it be with relatives, whatever issue that you're just stuck at this point, here's what you do. First of all, you turn to Jesus. You're not alone. You're not alone. He's with you, and He will help you through this thing. Secondly, you go to His Word. You find out what He says about where you're stuck. You find out what He says about what you need to do. You need to take your ownership in it, just like we talked about in Sunday school. Stop blaming everybody else. Figure out what your piece of the pie is and figure out what you need to do to help yourself get unstuck according to God. And third thing is this, you got to do something about it. Otherwise, Josh's truck and our trailer would still be in that spot. We had to do something. The nobleman had to turn around and head back home. The invalid guy had to stand up and head, and he headed to the temple because he understood this was a God thing. And one of the things that you're going to have to do is you're going to have to be obedient to that which you know God has clearly revealed what you should do. I deal with this so often in counseling. People come, Pastor, I need to know what to do. I need to know what to do. Okay, let's pray about it. Here's what God says. Follow it up a couple weeks later. How you doing to that? Well, you just don't understand my situation. And that's really not going to work for me because of this and this and this and this and this. You're just like my truck. You just want to stay there and blame stuff and come up with excuses and come up with all, instead of going and do something about it. I end with this. It's easy to become paralyzed when we're stuck in life. God desires we focus on Jesus Christ and His Word. He expects complete obedience and faith in Him if we're going to get unstuck. You're not alone in what you're up against. So follow what He wants you to do and take that step, as difficult as it might be, to get to where you need to be. Let's pray. Lord, help us. It's so easy, Lord, in life to get stuck, to come up against stuff that's overwhelming and paralyzing. It's so easy, Lord, to basically come up with our plans and the way we think everything should work. But Lord, help us to turn to You. Help us to put our faith and trust in Your Word and Your plans and Your purposes and not our own. And Lord, may we step out and obey. Do that which You have impressed upon our heart to do. So that, Lord, as we often say here, we could be doers of Your Word and not just hearers. These things we ask in Your name.